Welcome to another episode of the English Pod community with me, Blake. Today, we're diving into advanced English listening and speaking practice. Have you ever felt like you're not quite understanding everything when native speakers talk? Or maybe you can understand most things, but struggle to respond confidently in a conversation? Well, this episode is designed to help you tackle these challenges. By the end of today's episode, you'll have better listening comprehension, stronger speaking skills, and a deeper understanding of real-life English used by native speakers. We'll use some personal stories to illustrate how you can improve your English, and I'll walk you through some advanced techniques that will get you speaking like a pro. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where you couldn't fully express yourself, even though you understood everything? Maybe you were in a business meeting, at a social gathering, or even traveling abroad. It's a common struggle for many advanced learners. You understand English, but responding in the moment can feel a bit overwhelming. Today, we're going to work on overcoming that feeling, and I'll share with you a personal story that will help you break through that barrier. Let me tell you about a time I was in a meeting with a group of professionals from different countries. We were discussing a project, and the conversation was moving quickly. People were using idiomatic expressions and advanced vocabulary that I hadn't encountered much before. At first, I felt a little lost. But instead of panicking, I remembered a key lesson that helped me in that moment. I focused on the flow of the conversation and the tone of the speakers, rather than stressing over every single word. For example, one colleague, Sarah, was explaining a complicated idea using phrases like, "at the end of the day," and "let's circle back to this." Even though I didn't know every single word, I understood the context. I knew she was offering a summary and suggesting we revisit a point later. In that moment, I realized the importance of context and tone in understanding native speakers. It's not always about knowing every single word. It's about understanding the message as a whole. Another story I want to share comes from a trip I took to Italy last year. I was in a restaurant, and the waiter, speaking in rapid Italian accented English, started asking me if I wanted a sweet or savory dish. At first, I thought he was asking about the flavor of the dish. But after a moment of confusion, I realized he was referring to whether I wanted a dessert or a main course. In both of these real-life situations, I learned something valuable. Advanced English isn't just about vocabulary. It's about using your knowledge of the language and context to navigate conversations, even when they're fast or full of unfamiliar expressions. This skill is crucial, whether you're in a professional setting or chatting with friends. Now, let's focus on how you can improve your listening and speaking with a few practical tips. First, immerse yourself in English as much as possible. The more you listen to native speakers, the more you'll start to pick up on their rhythms and patterns. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or even talk to English speakers online. The exposure will make a huge difference. Next, practice speaking. Every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Find someone to converse with or talk to yourself about your day. The goal is to start thinking in English and responding more naturally. You'll get better with time, and you'll feel more confident in conversations. Lastly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Advanced learners often worry too much about speaking perfectly, but that's not what matters. The key is communication, being able to express your thoughts clearly and effectively. That's how native speakers communicate, and that's what you should aim for too. So remember, listening and speaking go hand in hand. By practicing real-life conversations and embracing mistakes as part of the process, you'll continue to grow your skills. I'll be right here, helping you along the way with more tips, personal stories, and examples of how you can sound like a fluent English speaker. Keep listening, keep practicing, and let's get started. I know that as an advanced English learner, you've already put in a lot of hard work. Maybe you've mastered some of the tricky grammar rules, or you can read newspapers and books without too much trouble. But when it comes to real-life conversations, especially with native speakers, it can still be a little intimidating, right? That's because real-life English isn't always as clear and structured as what you read in textbooks. It's full of slang, idiomatic expressions, cultural references, and sometimes even informal grammar, all of which can make it feel like you're facing an obstacle. But here's the good news. All of this is part of what makes English rich and exciting. The more you expose yourself to it, the easier it becomes to navigate these challenges. I want to share a story from my own life to show you exactly what I mean. A few months ago, I was invited to a casual get-together with some friends of mine who are all native English speakers. We were all sitting around, chatting about our week, when suddenly the topic turned to an unexpected situation one of my friends had faced at work. She said something like, "It really threw me for a loop." Now, at first, I was confused. I wasn't sure if she was talking about a literal loop or some sort of metaphor. But as she continued to speak, I realized that she meant something had surprised her or caught her off guard. Here's the thing. I could have been embarrassed by not knowing the expression threw me for a loop. But instead, I decided to ask her what she meant. She was happy to explain, and we moved on with the conversation. The key lesson here is that when you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask. Native speakers are usually more than happy to explain, and asking for clarification will help you learn more than just guessing. This brings us to one of the biggest tips I can give you for improving your listening and speaking skills. Always be curious. Now, curiosity is powerful when you're learning a language because it helps you keep engaging with the language in a natural, authentic way. For instance, in a conversation, if you hear a new word or expression, take the time to ask about it. Don't just let it go. Ask, get clarification, and understand how to use it in the future. This curiosity will build your vocabulary, help you grasp new ideas, and make conversations much more enjoyable. Let me give you another example. A while ago, I was having lunch with a colleague named Alex. He's a native English speaker, and we were talking about a new project at work. During our conversation, he used an expression that I hadn't heard before. Let's not reinvent the wheel. At first, I thought it had something to do with transportation or technology, but after a moment, I understood that it meant we shouldn't waste time creating something from scratch if it already exists. This situation shows how important it is to pay attention to common expressions and idioms in English. Native speakers love to use them because they can communicate complex ideas in a short and simple way. If you only rely on formal English, you might miss out on understanding the essence of many conversations. That's why listening to real-life stories, whether on a podcast like this one, a TV show, or even while chatting with friends, helps you pick up these real-world expressions. And speaking of real-life stories, I have another one to share. Last year, I was traveling to a small town in the United States for a work event. The local culture there was very different from what I was used to, and I had a chance to observe how people interacted in casual settings. One evening, I was at a bar with a few colleagues, and someone started talking about a recent event they'd attended. They said, "That was a real game changer for me." I had heard the expression game changer before, but in that moment, I wasn't exactly sure how they were using it. Was it a literal game? I decided to ask them directly what they meant, and they explained that they were referring to something that had a big positive impact on their life. I realized then that game changer was a powerful phrase that could be used in many situations, especially when talking about major changes or new opportunities. By asking questions like this, you're training your brain to not only understand English, but also to engage with it actively. The more you engage with real-life situations, the better you'll understand the language and its nuances. This kind of active participation is what truly helps you become fluent. So, don't shy away from asking questions or even making mistakes. Every time you use a new word or phrase, you're getting one step closer to speaking naturally. But here's another important tip. Focus on listening to a variety of accents and voices. In the world of English, you'll encounter different accents, dialects, and slang from people around the world. Even in the US alone, there are various regional accents and ways of speaking, and understanding them will give you a better grasp of the language as a whole. For example, a conversation with someone from New York may be quite different from one with someone from Texas, even though they're both speaking English. As you expose yourself to these differences, you'll train your ear to better understand a wider range of speakers. I remember during my travels, I met a couple of people from Scotland. They had very distinct accents, and at first, I struggled to understand what they were saying. But instead of getting frustrated, I listened carefully and asked questions. Gradually, I started to recognize certain patterns in their speech, and that made it easier to follow along. Over time, I became more confident in understanding different accents, and now I feel much more comfortable with any kind of English conversation. Now, let's talk about pronunciation for a moment. As an advanced learner, your pronunciation might already be quite good, but there's always room for improvement. One thing I've found helpful in my own practice is to mimic how native speakers talk. This technique is called shadowing. It involves listening to someone speak, then repeating exactly what they said, copying their tone, rhythm, and intonation. This practice helps you develop a more natural-sounding voice and can make you feel more at ease in conversations. The next time you're listening to a podcast or watching a movie in English, try shadowing the speaker. Repeat what they say out loud, focusing on the way they stress certain words or phrases. This will help you speak more fluently and sound more like a native speaker. Plus, it'll help you understand how different words connect and flow together in everyday speech. So if you've been listening closely today, you've probably realized that improving your listening and speaking skills doesn't just happen by sitting passively. It's all about practice. Practice listening, practice speaking, and most importantly, practice engaging with the language. Keep listening to real-life stories, keep asking questions, and above all, keep speaking. Your English will only get stronger, and you'll feel more confident in every conversation. I'm so glad you're still with me, and I know you're serious about improving your English listening and speaking skills. That's why in this episode, we're going even deeper. We're going to explore not just how to listen better, but how to respond naturally in English, how to keep up with fast conversations, and how to express yourself clearly and confidently. Now, let's start with a quick question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone was speaking English and you understood the words, but not the meaning? Maybe they were using an idiom, slang, or speaking too quickly. Or maybe you were watching a TV show and by the time you understood one sentence, the characters had already moved on to the next part of the conversation. If that has happened to you, don't worry. You're not alone. That's actually a very common experience for English learners, even at an advanced level. But the good news is that you can train your brain to process English faster and more naturally. Let me tell you a personal story about a time when I really struggled with listening in English. Years ago, when I first started living in an English-speaking country, I thought I was pretty good at English. I had studied grammar, I could read books and articles, and I even felt confident writing in English. But then, one day, I was invited to a party, and that's when I realized I still had a lot to learn. At the party, everyone was speaking in fast, casual English. They were using idioms I had never heard before. They were laughing at jokes I didn't understand. And the worst part? Every time someone asked me a question, I had to pause and think for a few seconds before answering. That pause made me feel awkward, and I could tell that some people lost interest in the conversation because I was too slow to respond. I remember one specific moment. Someone turned to me and said, "Hey, what do you think of the new place?" Now, in my head, I was trying to process, new place? Did they mean a new apartment? A new restaurant? A new office? I wasn't sure. But instead of asking, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, it's nice." And guess what? The person looked confused because my answer didn't really fit the question. At that moment, I realized that understanding English isn't just about knowing vocabulary. It's about catching the full meaning of what people are saying, including the context, the tone, and the cultural background behind their words. That experience made me change the way I practiced English. Instead of just memorizing words, I started paying more attention to real conversations. I listened carefully to the way native speakers talked, how they used certain words, and how their tone changed depending on the situation. I also started watching English TV shows with subtitles, then rewatching them without subtitles to train my ear. And most importantly, I practiced responding faster, so I wouldn't freeze in real conversations. If you've ever felt like I did at that party, struggling to keep up with conversations, then I want to share some strategies that helped me. These are techniques that will make your listening skills stronger and your speaking skills more natural. First, let's talk about active listening. A lot of English learners make the mistake of thinking that listening is a passive skill, but that's not true. If you just sit back and let words go in one ear and out the other, you won't improve. Instead, you need to engage with what you're hearing. How do you do that? By predicting what's coming next. For example, imagine you're listening to someone tell a story. Try to guess what they're going to say next. If someone starts a sentence with, "I was so surprised when," your brain should immediately start thinking, "Okay, what kind of things surprise people?" This keeps you actively engaged in the conversation instead of just waiting to hear every word. Another trick is to focus on keywords instead of trying to understand every single word. Native speakers often speak quickly and may even swallow some sounds. But if you train yourself to catch the important words, you'll still understand the main idea. For example, if someone says, "I was running late, so I grabbed a coffee," and rushed to work, you don't need to hear every single word to understand what happened. The key words here are running late, coffee, and work. Your brain will naturally fill in the missing details. Now, let's move on to another common challenge, speaking more naturally. A lot of English learners worry about making mistakes, and because of that, they hesitate before speaking. I used to do this too. I would think so much about grammar and sentence structure that by the time I was ready to say something, the conversation had already moved on. The truth is, native speakers don't always use perfect grammar in casual conversations. They speak in a relaxed, natural way. If you focus too much on speaking perfectly, you'll slow yourself down. Instead, try speaking in shorter, simpler sentences at first. For example, instead of trying to say, "I believe that the main reason for this issue is a lack of communication between the two parties," just say, "I think the problem is bad communication." It's clearer, easier to say, and sounds more natural. Another thing that helped me was learning conversation connectors. These are small phrases that help you sound more fluent. For example, Instead of saying yes or no in response to a question, try using phrases like, "Yeah, I think so." "Not really, but I see your point." "Actually, that's a good question." These little phrases make your speech flow more naturally and help you sound more confident. Now, let's talk about confidence. A big reason why many advanced learners struggle with speaking is that they don't feel confident enough to just start talking. But here's a secret. Confidence doesn't come before speaking. It comes from speaking. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll get. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, Daniel, was learning English, and he was really shy about speaking. He always worried that people would judge his accent or his mistakes. One day he decided to challenge himself. For one whole month, he would start at least one conversation in English every single day. It didn't matter if it was with a friend, a stranger, or even just ordering food at a cafe. The goal was to get comfortable with speaking. At first, he was nervous, but after a few days, he realized that most people didn't care if he made mistakes. They just appreciated the effort. By the end of the month, he was speaking much more confidently. His English wasn't suddenly perfect, but he was no longer afraid to join conversations. That's why I always tell learners, don't wait until you feel ready to speak. Just start speaking, and the confidence will come naturally. Another great exercise for building confidence is shadowing. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say, mimicking their pronunciation and rhythm. This helps you sound more natural and get used to the flow of English. You can do this with podcasts, TV shows, or even with this episode. Just pick a sentence, pause, and repeat after me. Now, let's put everything we've talked about into practice. Imagine you're having a conversation with an English speaker. You want to sound natural, respond quickly, and keep the conversation going. How do you do that? First, listen actively. Pay attention to the keywords. Predict what the person will say next. If they ask you a question, don't overthink it. Just respond naturally. Use simple sentences and conversation connectors. If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. And most importantly, don't be afraid to speak. I know this is a lot of information, but don't worry. You don't have to master everything at once. Just start with one small change. Maybe focus on active listening today and work on confidence tomorrow. The key is to practice a little every day. And remember, learning English isn't about being perfect. It's about making progress. Keep going and you'll get there. Let's keep going, diving even deeper into how to improve your listening and speaking in English. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Blake, what if I'm already doing some of these things but still struggle to understand fast speakers or keep up with the conversation? Trust me, I've been there. It can feel frustrating, like you're just one step behind. But the good news is that every challenge you face is an opportunity to grow, and there's a lot more you can do to push your skills even further. One powerful technique is called contextual listening. This means understanding not just the words, but the overall context of the conversation. Native speakers rely heavily on context when they communicate. Let me give you a real-life example. A couple of years ago, I was having a casual conversation with a friend about a recent trip he'd taken. He said, "I love the place, but the food was a bit of a letdown." Now, if you were only focusing on individual words, you might think, what do you mean by letdown? But here's where the power of context comes in. In this case, because we were talking about food, the word letdown became clear. It means disappointment or something that didn't meet expectations. I didn't need to look up the word in a dictionary. I understood it in the context of the conversation. Here's how you can practice this. Start by listening to short audio, clips, or watching videos in English. After listening to the first 30 seconds, pause the video and try to predict what will happen next. What's the conversation about? Who are the people talking? What are the key points? It's like playing detective with the conversation. And if you're unsure about something, take a guess. Trust me, your brain will start filling in the blanks. And the more you practice this, the easier it will get to follow real conversations. Another thing that's incredibly helpful is getting used to listening to different accents. I know it's tough when you're used to one accent, and suddenly you hear someone from another part of the world. You might be used to American English and then hear British English, Australian English, or even accents from places like South Africa or India. They can all sound different, but here's the thing. Every accent has its own rhythm and melody. And just like learning to understand one accent, you can learn to understand all of them. Let me tell you about my own experience with this. A few years ago, I went to an international conference. People were speaking English from all over the world. Americans, Brits, Australians, Canadians, and many others. At first, I had a hard time understanding some of them. For example, I had never heard a Scottish accent up close before. The first time I spoke to someone from Scotland, it felt like they were speaking a completely different language. But over time, I started listening more carefully to their rhythm, to the way they formed sentences, and I realized that English wasn't so different. It was just the accent that made it sound unique. If you're in a similar situation, try this. Listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, or even Netflix shows with different English accents. Start with subtitles if you need them. Over time, your ear will get used to these accents, and it will be so much easier to follow conversations. Okay, now let's talk about something that really helps take your speaking to the next level. Understanding the importance of intonation. Intonation refers to the rise and fall of the voice when speaking. It can completely change the meaning of a sentence. For example, the sentence, "You're coming," right? Sounds different depending on whether the tone goes up or down at the end. If the intonation goes up, it sounds like a question. If it goes down, it sounds more like a statement or even an assumption. When we speak in English, we don't just say the words. We use our voice to express emotions, emphasize certain parts of a sentence, and even hint at the meaning behind the words. So, if you're trying to improve your speaking and listening, pay attention to how native speakers use intonation. It's not just about what they say, but how they say it. For instance, imagine you're in a conversation with a friend, and they say, "I'm so glad we're talking about this." The tone of their voice will tell you if they are excited, happy, or just being sarcastic. If their tone is upbeat and positive, you can tell they're genuinely happy. But if their voice is flat, it could mean they're not as excited as they're pretending to be. To improve this, try shadowing speakers. Take a sentence from your favorite movie or podcast and repeat it exactly as you hear it, imitating the rise and fall of the voice. You can also record yourself and compare your intonation to the original. This will not only improve your speaking, but also help you understand native speakers better when they use different tones to express themselves. Let's move on to something else that's really important when it comes to both speaking and listening: the use of fillers. Fillers are words or sounds that we use to fill gaps in conversation while we're thinking of what to say next. In English, these include words like you know, and like. While they may seem unimportant, they actually play a big role in making our speech sound more natural. I remember the first time I heard someone say, "Well, you know, I've always liked to travel." I thought to myself, why did they say, "you know"? It didn't seem to add anything to the sentence. But later, I realized that using fillers in conversation is part of the flow of natural speech. Native speakers often use fillers to give themselves time to think while keeping the conversation going smoothly. Here's an exercise to help you with fillers. Choose a simple sentence and say it out loud without any fillers. For example, I went to the store yesterday. Now, say the same sentence again, but this time, add a filler like, you know, or I mean. You might say, I went to the store yesterday, you know. Notice how it changes the rhythm of the sentence. Practice this exercise until you're able to use fillers naturally in conversation without thinking too much about them. Now, let's talk about a crucial part of improving your speaking skills: having real conversations with real people. This is by far the best way to learn. You can read books, listen to podcasts, or even practice on your own, but nothing beats having an actual conversation. It's in these moments that you really learn how to respond naturally, how to deal with misunderstandings, and how to improve your listening in real time. If you don't have many opportunities to speak with native speakers, try joining online language exchange platforms. Websites and apps like HelloTalk or Tandem allow you to connect with people from all over the world, and you can practice speaking and listening with them. If you feel nervous about speaking, remember that most people are very understanding and they'll appreciate your effort. Here's a little tip for these conversations. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I know that sounds simple, but it's very important. In fact, making mistakes is one of the fastest ways to improve. Every time you make a mistake, you learn something new. I remember when I made my first mistake speaking with a native speaker. I said something like, I like to do hiking. And my friend quickly corrected me, saying, it's just, I like hiking. I was a little embarrassed at first, but that correction stuck with me, and now I always say, I like hiking. Remember, it's all about practicing, learning from your mistakes, and building confidence as you go. One area that can really take your speaking to the next level is understanding the culture behind the language. A lot of language learners focus solely on vocabulary and grammar, but in reality, speaking a language fluently also means understanding the cultural context. Why is this important? Well, language and culture are deeply connected, and how we speak often reflects our cultural values, social norms, and even our humor. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I visited Japan, and I had the chance to sit down for a traditional tea ceremony. The ceremony was formal, with a lot of specific rituals and customs involved. The Japanese language reflects this formality in different ways. For example, you wouldn't use the same language to speak to your boss as you would to your friend. In fact, in Japan, the language you use is often more important than what you actually say. Now, how does this relate to English? English speakers, especially in different regions or countries, may use informal or formal language depending on the situation. Understanding this helps you sound more natural in conversation. For example, when you meet someone for the first time, you're likely to say, "Nice to meet you," which is formal and polite. But if you're talking to a close friend, you might say, "Hey, what's up?" The more you understand the social context of the language, the easier it becomes to choose the right words in the right situation. This brings me to another important point: slang and idiomatic expressions. These are expressions that don't always make sense if you translate them directly into your native language. But they are so important to understand if you want to sound more natural when speaking English. For example, have you ever heard the phrase, "It's raining cats and dogs"? If you translated that directly into your language, it wouldn't make any sense at all. But if you understand the cultural meaning behind it, you know it just means it's raining very heavily. Let me tell you a funny story. A couple of years ago, I was in London, and I was talking to a local friend. I said, "I don't really feel like going out today." And he replied, "Fair enough, mate." At first, I was confused. What did fair enough mean? In my mind, it didn't seem to fit. But after hearing it used a few more times, I realized it was a way to acknowledge someone's point of view. It was a casual and polite way of agreeing or accepting what someone said. This is the power of slang and idioms. They make conversations sound natural and lively. They also reflect how English speakers interact with each other in real life. If you want to sound more fluent, try learning a few idiomatic expressions and slang words. You can easily pick them up from podcasts, movies, or conversations with native speakers. And don't worry about sounding perfect. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll get with them. One of my favorite ways to learn slang is through TV shows or movies. Think about it. Movies and TV shows are filled with conversations that reflect how people actually speak in real life. You get to hear the language in its natural setting, and you can even pick up on the nonverbal communication like body, language, facial expressions, and tone of voice. These are all part of how people communicate, and they can help you understand and improve your speaking skills even more. For example, I was watching an American sitcom recently, and one character said, "I've got a bone to pick with you." At first, I had no idea what it meant, but after hearing it a few more times, I realized that it means to have an issue or a problem with someone that needs to be discussed. Now, I use that phrase when talking to friends, and they all understand what I mean. It's a simple but effective way to add more personality to your conversations. Let's talk about another crucial aspect of improving your listening and speaking skills: active listening. Active listening is when you don't just hear the words, but you actively engage with them. You think about what's being said, you ask questions, and you respond in a way that shows you've really been paying attention. This is an essential skill for building better conversations. I'll give you an example. Last year, I had a conversation with a colleague at work. She was telling me about a difficult project she was working on, and instead of just nodding along, I asked questions to show I was really listening. I said, "That sounds challenging. What part do you find the most difficult?" This made her feel like I was genuinely interested in her experience, and it kept the conversation going. If you're learning English, you can practice active listening by paying close attention to the speakers in your podcast or in movies or even in conversations with native speakers. Don't just let the words go in one ear and out the other. Focus on what's being said, think about the meaning, and try to participate in the conversation. The more you engage, the better you'll understand. Another great way to practice active listening is through shadowing. This is when you repeat what the speaker says, almost like mimicking them. It's a fantastic technique for improving pronunciation, rhythm, and even understanding. Try listening to a short podcast segment or video. Pause it after a sentence, and then repeat exactly what the speaker said. Pay attention to their pronunciation, their tone, and their rhythm. It's like copying their style, which will help you sound more fluent. One tool that can really help you with active listening is using transcripts. Many podcasts, videos, or online resources offer transcripts of what is being said. You can read along as you listen. This helps you connect the sounds to the words and understand more clearly. And if you hear a word or phrase you don't know, look it up. Over time, you'll start recognizing the words faster and understanding them in real conversations. Finally, let's talk about pronunciation. I know it's something that a lot of learners struggle with, and it can be tough to sound like a native speaker. But here's the thing. Pronunciation is not just about making the perfect sounds. It's about making yourself understood and finding your own natural way of speaking. You don't have to have a perfect accent, but you should aim for clarity. I had a friend who was learning English, and his pronunciation wasn't perfect, but he was still really good at making himself understood. He had a strong accent, but he used his voice confidently, and people understood him every time. He didn't worry too much about getting every sound exactly right, but he focused on speaking clearly. When learning a language, especially English, one of the most rewarding feelings is when you begin to think in English rather than translating from your native language. It's a significant milestone in becoming fluent. Thinking directly in English helps you process language faster and more naturally in real-time conversations. It reduces the time you spend translating in your head and allows you to speak more confidently and fluently. For example, when I first started learning English, I had to think in my native language and then translate everything in my mind before speaking. This made conversations slow, and sometimes I even lost track of what I was saying. But over time, I practiced listening to English every day, watching TV shows, and reading books in English. Slowly, I began noticing that I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I was understanding the language instantly. And this made speaking English feel so much more natural. One way to train yourself to think in English is by surrounding yourself with the language. Listen to podcasts, watch English language movies or TV shows, and read books or articles in English. Try to make it a habit to do these things every day, even if just for a short time. It doesn't matter if you understand everything at first. The more you expose yourself to English, the more you'll start thinking in English without realizing it. A powerful way to practice thinking in English is by narrating your day in English. For example, when you wake up in the morning, try to describe what you're doing in English. I'm making coffee. Now I'm putting on my shoes. I'm heading to work. This kind of self-talk might feel odd at first, but it's a great way to develop your fluency. It's like having a mini conversation with yourself, and it helps you practice vocabulary and sentence structures that you can use in real conversations. Another way to improve your ability to think in English is to try to immerse yourself in real-life situations where you have no choice but to use English. For example, travel is a fantastic way to practice. Imagine you're in an English-speaking country and you need to ask for directions. You wouldn't have time to translate everything. In your head, you'd have to think quickly and respond in English. The more you practice in these types of real-life situations, the faster your brain will become accustomed to thinking in English. Now, let's talk about listening. Understanding native speakers can sometimes be tricky, especially because native speakers tend to speak quickly and use a lot of slang or idiomatic expressions. But don't let that discourage you. One of the best ways to understand native speakers is to practice active listening. Active listening is more than just hearing words. It's about understanding the meaning behind them and paying attention to the context. A great way to practice active listening is by listening to podcasts like this one. You can start by listening to the podcast once to get the general idea, then listen again to pick up more details. Don't worry if you don't understand everything right away. The goal is to gradually get better at understanding the language in real contexts. To enhance your active listening skills, try this method. Choose a short section of a podcast or video, pause after each sentence or paragraph, and repeat what you heard in your own words. This is called paraphrasing, and it helps you solidify your understanding. You can even listen to the same podcast episode multiple times. Each time, try to understand more details than you did before. It's a great way to build your comprehension. Skills. One thing I recommend is to write down new words or phrases you hear while listening. This will help you expand your vocabulary. Look up the meanings and try to use these new words in your own sentences. This is how you can slowly build a more natural-sounding vocabulary that you can use in conversations. Sometimes English learners find it difficult to understand different accents, but don't worry about it. The more exposure you get, the easier it becomes to understand various accents. For example, you might listen to podcasts or watch shows with different English accents like American, British, or Australian. Each accent might sound different, but they all follow the same fundamental rules of English. The more you expose yourself to them, the more familiar they will sound. To improve this, try listening to native speakers and mimicking their rhythm. Pay close attention to how they connect words and phrases, and try to copy that flow. You can even practice by reading sentences out loud and focusing on the natural rhythm of the language. Another tip is to work on your articulation. It's not just about the sounds, but how clearly you say them. Practice enunciating each word and sound carefully. A good exercise is to practice tongue twisters in English. They help you improve your articulation and make your speech clearer. Let's also talk about a technique that can help you take your listening skills to the next level. The technique of shadowing. Shadowing involves repeating what you hear in real time. It's a great way to improve both listening and speaking simultaneously. Here's how it works. Choose a short audio clip, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube video, or even a conversation. Play the clip, then pause after a sentence or two. Try to repeat exactly what the speaker said, mimicking their tone, intonation, and rhythm. Keep doing this with different sentences. Over time, this exercise will help you understand how native speakers structure their sentences and use their voices. It also helps you practice your pronunciation, fluency, and listening comprehension. Shadowing is especially useful for improving your ability to understand different accents and speech speeds. Once you feel comfortable, try shadowing faster speakers or different regional accents. It's a great way to challenge yourself and grow as a language learner. And one more thing I want to emphasize is the importance of having patience with yourself. Language learning is a journey, not a race. The more consistent you are with your practice, the better your English listening and speaking will become. So keep practicing, keep engaging with the language, and most importantly, enjoy the process. Language learning is a skill that develops over time, and every step you take brings you closer to fluency. One of the most powerful ways to improve both your listening and speaking is by actively participating in conversations. Now, I know that this might sound obvious, but a lot of learners avoid speaking until they feel ready or perfect. However, I want to tell you that making mistakes is part of the process. Don't worry about speaking perfectly. Focus instead on communicating and engaging. The more you speak, the more comfortable you'll become with making mistakes, and the quicker you'll learn from them. Let me give you an example. I remember when I first started learning a new language. At first, I was nervous about speaking because I didn't want to make mistakes, but then I forced myself to join group conversations, even if it meant I'd make a mistake. I remember one time I said a word completely wrong, but the person I was speaking with understood me anyway. That moment taught me a valuable lesson. People care more about understanding you than about perfection. With every conversation, I got better and more confident. I encourage you to try to have conversations with native speakers or language learners who are at a similar level. You don't have to speak for long at first. Even short conversations are valuable. What's important is that you're actively practicing and improving your skills. Now, let's discuss listening in more depth. We've talked about active listening, but one technique I want to introduce is called listening for keywords. This is especially helpful when you're listening to fast speakers, or if you're in a situation where there's a lot of background noise. Instead of trying to catch every single word, focus on listening for the most important words or keywords in the sentence. These are usually the nouns, verbs, or adjectives that carry the core meaning. For example, let's say you're listening to a story about someone who went on a trip. You might hear something like, I went to the mountains and I hiked all day. The weather was beautiful and I saw some amazing views. If you focus on the keywords like mountains, hiked, weather, and amazing views, you can understand the core meaning of the sentence without catching every word. This technique will help you stay engaged with the conversation even if you don't understand every single detail. You can practice this by listening to podcasts or videos, and after each sentence or segment, try to summarize what you heard in your own words. The more you practice identifying the key points, the easier it becomes to follow along, even when native speakers speak quickly or use slang. Another useful method for improving your listening skills is to focus on intonation and rhythm rather than individual words. Intonation is the rise and fall in pitch when speaking, and rhythm is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. English, especially, relies heavily on intonation and rhythm, so understanding these elements is crucial to understanding spoken English. For example, think about the way a question sounds in English compared to a statement. A question often has a rising intonation at the end. Are you coming to the party? Versus a statement, which has a falling intonation. I'm going to the party. Listening carefully to how the speaker's voice rises and falls helps. You understand whether they're asking a question, making a statement, or giving a command. It also helps you understand the emotions or feelings behind their words. You can practice this by listening to different audio clips and focusing on how the speaker's tone changes. Try to mimic their intonation and rhythm while speaking. This is an excellent way to sound more natural when you speak English. Along with that, let's talk about shadowing a little more. I mentioned earlier that shadowing is a fantastic technique for both listening and speaking. But I want to emphasize that the key to successful shadowing is repetition. The more you practice, the easier it becomes to imitate the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of native speakers. If you're new to shadowing, try starting with short sentences. For example, take a sentence from a podcast or video and listen to it a few times. Pause the video and repeat what the speaker said as closely as possible. Make sure to copy not just the words, but also their tone, speed, and rhythm. As you improve, increase the length of the sentences you're shadowing. Over time, you'll notice your own speaking becoming smoother and more fluent. Another useful listening technique that can enhance your English skills is listening for context. When you're listening to a conversation, sometimes it's difficult to understand a single word. This can be frustrating, especially when you don't know the vocabulary. However, context helps you fill in those gaps. Even if you don't understand every word, you can often guess the meaning of unknown words based on the surrounding words or the situation. Let's say you're listening to a conversation about a person's job. They say, I work as a manager at a large company, and I'm responsible for overseeing teams of engineers. If you don't know the word overseeing, don't worry. From the context, you can guess that overseeing means managing or supervising. This strategy of using context clues helps you to keep following along with the conversation without feeling stuck. You can practice this technique by listening to news reports or interviews, where the speakers use more formal language and include a lot of context. Even if you don't understand everything, try to guess the meaning of the words based on the surrounding sentences. Now, let's talk about how you can improve your speaking fluency through practice routines. Just like any other skill, regular practice is key to improving your speaking abilities. But it's important that you focus on building a speaking routine that works for you. For example, set aside time every day or every other day for speaking practice. This can be as simple as speaking aloud in English as you go about your day. Maybe you describe what you see, what you're doing, or what you plan to do. You can also practice by recording yourself speaking and then listening back to identify areas where you can improve. The more you practice speaking aloud, the more your confidence will grow, and the easier it will be to speak naturally in conversations. Another way to practice speaking is by using language exchange apps or finding a conversation partner. Language exchange apps allow you to connect with native speakers who are learning your language, and you can practice speaking with them regularly. This is a great way to get direct feedback on your speaking skills and learn more about colloquial English that you might not find in textbooks. Speaking of language exchange, let me tell you about my experience using one of these apps. I connected with a person who was learning my native language, and we agreed to practice English for 30 minutes and then switch to my language for the next 30 minutes. It was such a great way to improve my speaking, and it helped me get used to listening to different accents and speaking styles. The best part was that I was able to ask questions about words or phrases that confused me, and they gave me useful tips on how to improve. And don't forget about personalized learning. What I mean by that is tailoring your English practice to suit your personal interests and goals. For example, if you're passionate about travel, try watching videos or listening to podcasts about travel topics. This will help you learn relevant vocabulary that you can use in conversations when you talk about places you visited or places you want to go. The more you practice with topics that interest you, the more motivated you'll be to continue learning, and the more fluent you'll become in these areas. This personalized approach makes your learning feel less like a chore and more like something you enjoy. You'll find yourself listening to English more often because you're learning about topics that excite you. The best part is, by using this method, you will also expand your vocabulary and gain more confidence in speaking about a wide range of topics. Lastly, let's talk about feedback and self-reflection. Getting feedback on your speaking skills is crucial for improving. If you have a teacher, tutor, or conversation partner, ask them to give you constructive feedback. They can point out areas where you can improve your pronunciation, vocabulary, or grammar. You can also reflect on your own performance by recording your speaking sessions and listening back. Try to identify mistakes or areas where you could improve, and then focus on those areas in your next practice session. Self-reflection also means taking note of the progress you've made. When you listen to recordings from earlier in your learning journey, you'll realize how much you've improved. This will motivate you to continue practicing and growing. Let's not forget that improving your English listening and speaking skills is a journey, not a destination. Every step you take brings you closer to fluency. So keep listening, keep speaking, and keep challenging yourself. By practicing these techniques regularly, you'll soon find yourself thinking in English more naturally, speaking more fluently, and understanding native speakers with ease. Keep going and enjoy the learning process. Let's keep the momentum going and dive deeper into strategies and techniques that will help you enhance your English listening and speaking skills even further. There's so much more to explore, and the more you immerse yourself in different practice methods, the better and faster you'll progress. By now, you've probably learned that improving in English is not about just understanding grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary. It's about actively engaging with the language and using it in real-life situations. First, let's talk about contextual learning, which is a game changer for improving your listening and speaking. As you know, the world of English is full of idioms, slang, and expressions that aren't always easy to understand if you're just focusing on individual words. But if you focus on the context in which the words are used, you'll get a much clearer picture. For example, if you hear someone say, "I'm feeling under the weather," and you don't know what under the weather means, You could easily get lost. However, if you think about the context, the person might be talking about how they're feeling or whether they're going to work or not, you can deduce that they're not feeling well. In real-life situations, people often don't speak in complete sentences or use perfect grammar. They use phrases, contractions, and expressions that might sound confusing at first. That's why focusing on contextual learning will make you feel more confident and less frustrated. If you hear something you don't understand, instead of just stopping, try to figure out the meaning based on what's happening around you. Even in fast conversations, this technique will help you catch the main idea. Now, immersing yourself in English every day is key to improving your skills. I know you've heard this before, but let's break it down. One powerful way to immerse yourself in English is by subtitling your world. What I mean by this is try to think and speak in English throughout your day, even if you're just talking to yourself. If you're cooking, you can narrate your actions, such as saying, "I'm chopping the onions, adding the garlic, and stirring the pot." If you're walking down the street, you can describe what you see around you in English. "I see a bus coming, and there's a park with a few people jogging." You don't have to speak out loud all the time, but mentally practicing and thinking in English will help you get used to the language in everyday situations. This habit will not only help your listening, but also improve your speaking, because you'll be constantly reinforcing vocabulary and sentence structures in your mind. This method is so simple, but incredibly effective in boosting your fluency. Another tip to boost your listening skills is to pay attention to different accents and dialects in English. As you know, English is spoken all over the world, and people from different countries and regions have their own unique accents and ways of speaking. Whether it's British English, American English, Australian English, or even accents within those countries, there are variations in vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And if you only listen to one type of English, you might find it difficult to understand other accents when you encounter them in real life. Here's a real-life example. One time, I was listening to a podcast where the host had a thick accent from the UK. I found it a little challenging to understand at first, but instead of getting frustrated, I focused on the context and tried to pick out words I recognized. Over time, I became more familiar with the accent and started to feel more comfortable. I also began listening to podcasts or videos from different regions, which really helped me broaden my understanding of how people speak in various parts of the world. One way to practice listening to different accents is to find videos, TV shows, or podcasts with a variety of speakers. Try to listen to interviews, debates, or discussions with speakers from different countries. You can also use language exchange, apps where you can practice speaking with people from around the world, which will expose you to diverse accents and speaking styles. Now, let's talk about expanding your vocabulary, because the more words you know, the easier it will be to follow along in conversations. But I want you to focus on learning phrases, not just individual words. Why? Because phrases are what people actually use in real life. For example, you might know the word happy, but people often say things like feeling on top of the world or over the moon instead. These are phrases that native speakers use, and understanding them will make you sound more natural when you speak. You can expand your vocabulary by watching TV shows, movies, or YouTube videos in English and writing down new phrases or expressions. But don't just memorize them. Practice using them in conversations. Try to fit them into your daily speech. It might feel a bit unnatural at first, but the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become. Let's take another real-life example. When I first started learning a new language, I focused a lot on vocabulary. I knew a lot of words, but when it came to speaking, I would hesitate because I didn't know how to put those words together in natural-sounding sentences. What helped me was practicing phrases and sentence structures instead of just focusing on single words. For example, instead of just knowing buy, I learned how to say, I need to buy something, or I'm going to buy groceries later. Speaking of speaking skills, building your confidence is another crucial part of becoming fluent. I know it's easy to get nervous or self-conscious when speaking a new language, especially when you're worried about making mistakes. But let me tell you, mistakes are a huge part of learning. Everyone makes mistakes, and that's completely normal. The important thing is to not let those mistakes stop you. You'll improve much faster if you keep practicing, even when things don't go perfectly. One way to build confidence is by setting small, achievable goals. Instead of focusing on speaking fluently or perfectly right away, set a goal to learn and use a new phrase every week, or try having one conversation a day in English, even if it's just for 5 minutes. As you accomplish these smaller goals, you'll feel more confident and motivated to keep going. You'll soon realize that speaking English becomes more natural over time. Another great strategy is to use technology to your advantage. There are so many apps, websites, and tools available that can help you improve your listening and speaking skills. Some apps have speech recognition features that allow you to practice speaking and get feedback on your pronunciation. You can also use voice assistants like Siri or Google Assistant to practice speaking and get used to conversing in English. For example, I've used apps that let me record my voice and then compare it to a native speaker's pronunciation. At first, my pronunciation wasn't perfect, but over time, I was able to make small adjustments and sound more natural. Plus, technology has made it easier than ever to connect with native speakers or other learners for language exchange. There are platforms where you can schedule video calls or text chats with people from all over the world. I can't stress enough how important it is to stay consistent. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. If you practice just a little bit every day, you'll see steady progress. It's easy to get discouraged, especially when you don't see instant results, but consistency is key. Even when you're tired or busy, try to squeeze in at least a few minutes of listening or speaking. Practice each day. Over time, those few minutes add up to significant progress. And lastly, let's talk about using real-life stories and experiences to improve your English skills. People remember stories much better than they remember random facts or grammar rules. That's why it's so helpful to immerse yourself in real-life stories, whether they're from podcasts, TV shows, movies, or even books. Listening to these stories exposes you to natural English and helps you understand how people actually speak in day-to-day life. For instance, I once listened to a podcast where the host shared a story about how they accidentally got lost in a foreign city. Not only was it entertaining, but it also taught me new phrases related to directions, asking for help, and expressing confusion. It was a real-life situation that I could easily imagine myself in, and I learned so much from it by listening. To stories like this, you get to hear English as it's actually spoken, which is much more useful than studying a textbook.